It looks like we are going live now. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It is 11 a.m. on December 24th, 2023. We are so happy to have you on this Sunday, everyone. This session today is very special for a lot of people who are taking off because of the holidays, particularly Christmas tomorrow and Christmas Eve tonight. We thank all of you who are here with us to speak about spiritual subjects together with the Clearwater Baha'is and Mr. Edward Price. We have a topic that is very near and dear to a lot of the presenters, the people putting the programs together weekly. And that is, what is the divine curriculum and how does it work? We have this presentation that will focus on certain fundamental truths commonly referred to in the Baha'i Faith as progressive revelation, and which it's also referred to as the divine curriculum. The main concepts to be discussed and which will be used to answer the question expressed in the title of this talk. It is as follows: the oneness and infinity of God, related attributes of God, the unity of his messengers and divine educators, the nature and function of the creation as a divine classroom or school, where physical and reality and the spiritual worlds beyond are all so relevant, the concept of the afterlife, the oneness of humanity, the gradual unfoldment over many centuries of God's educational program or curriculum, as we're calling it, for the human race, the progressive and cumulative nature of this curriculum, the main knowledge, virtues, and abilities being covered in the divine curriculum, and the goals and objectives towards which the divine curriculum is taking humanity. These topics are found in a book series called The Divine Curriculum. This presentation will necessarily be a more concise and introductory overview of this material. And just to point out, this appeared in a spot on the American Baha'i, The Divine Curriculum, particularly about the Bab, Volume 5, Part 2. It's found in the American Baha'i magazine, which Baha'is have signed up for when they've declared that they're a Baha'i on Baha'i.us. People have declared that they are a member of the Baha'i Faith. They receive this magazine, and we get to see all these amazing books that are coming out. It just so happens to be that around the same time, the Divine Curriculum, the Volume 5, Part 2 about the Bab, it's released. So that's something cool. We want to do a quick introduction, though, about our presenter, Mr. Edward Price. He is a former atheist from a Jewish background who became Baha'i in 1973 at the University of Virginia. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia in psychology and religious studies. He has a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from National University of California and a further graduate study from Florida State University in the field of instructional systems design. His first book, The Divine Curriculum, Divine Design, Volume 1, was published in December 2015. In this book, Edward discusses the continuity of the missions of the great educators in the Abrahamic lineage, the substance of what God has been teaching humanity for the last 4,000 years, and the goals towards which God's education is leading humanity. The second and third books published are also part of the Divine Curriculum series, which was focused on the Bab. They were published in 2019 and 2021, respectively. Other books in this series will present the specific missions and teachings of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah. Now, not to get further into the weeds, Edward has served the Baha'i Faith in various capacities. He has lived in Wilmette, Illinois since 2005, near the Baha'i House of Worship. What a blessing. And further, he was co-writer and producer of the film The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith, released in 2018, which has been seen in over 500 venues in over 20 countries and at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Toronto. I'd like to ask that first question actually about the gate. And I want to ask, so I understand that you are co-writer and producer of The Gate. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can find that movie? Where can we watch it, and what is it about, if you don't mind? I know you may talk about it later, but I just want to ask how we can reach it, if you don't mind.
Sure. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
Um, yeah, they're very excited to be here. Um, the gate actually is available on YouTube for free. Um, you can Google the gate Dawn of the Baha'i Faith in the search field, and a bunch of options will come up, some awards, ceremonies, and various things. But near the top of the listing will be one that's labeled full version. And then you can just click on that. And it's 61 minutes, and you can watch it on your computer or on your stereo or whatever system you have.
So you're
As far
saying
as,
I can get on there right now and watch it?
well, hopefully you'll wait until after my talk is over. But yes,
Touche, touche.
yes. Um, Absolutely. You can see it at any time, day or night, 24/7, whenever you want to see it. Um, okay, so shall I go on to the second part of the question, which
Yes,
is what was my involvement?
yes, sir.
Um,
Yes, sir. Please.
um, Steve Sarowitz, who was the executive producer of the film and doing the film was his brainchild, approached me in 2016. And he had heard me give a talk on the Bob and at a Baha'i school, and he approached me and he said, "Ed, I think that you can help me with my project, a film that I'm working on, and I already have a director, and I'd like to recruit you." And so we talked about it. We came to an understanding, and I worked with Steve for 3 years. We wrote the script, we planned out the film, uh, interacted with the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and the Universal House of Justice in the making of the film. And eventually, 3 years later, in 2018, we were able to bring it out to the world. So I was there from the very, very beginning and participated in the crafting and structuring of and the writing of the entire project. So uh, Steve Sarowitz is also listed as a co-writer, and Bob Hercules, who is the director of the film, a very distinguished documentarian who lives in Chicago, he also is co-writer. So the three of us scripted it together. Is that good?
Yeah, that's very impressive. So
Thank you.
so we get to learn a little more about it that a lot of people don't know. That's very beautiful, and it's really it's for a lot of us who have watched The Gate, it's very much a great experience to have you here with us today to speak about it and what we can do to just learn more about the movie. It's always a nice experience, so we thank you for that. And I
Well,
understand that you came here for the divine curriculum, so I know they're related, but not to take you off of the base of the divine curriculum. We're ready for you whenever you are. We appreciate it so much.
well, that's great. I'd like to add one last little comment about the film, is
Mm.
that the film was just 61 minutes, but it took us 3 years to do it. And the reason is that at the time that we were working on the project, nobody had ever attempted to do a full documentary on any central figure of the faith. And the Baha'i teachings say that the manifestation of God should not be portrayed on screen. So, working with the National Spiritual Assembly and the Universal House of Justice, we had to figure out how to do that. And So there's quite a lot that goes into the issue of non-portrayal. And that was a crucial thing that we learned how to do by doing this project. Okay?
And the love and respect for the manifestation of God,
Having
for
to do
the
with the
divine.
respect for the manifestation of God, the divine educator. That's right.
But it's amazing though, and that's like the elephant in the room is how did you portray a movie about someone that there's so much reverence and respect that must be given, such that we don't even portray the personage of the Bob in the form of another actor. That's a
Absolutely.
real challenge.
That was the main challenge of the film. Um, and when we started, we didn't know how we were going to do it, but by the end, we figured out a way to get it done. Other filmmakers will come along and do an even better job in the future, but this was the first time, so it was a very wonderful experience to be a part of that.
You hear that, future filmmakers? That's a challenge.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. I don't think we're the best film, but we're the first one. And so hopefully there'll be much better filmmakers that will come along in the future and do an even more outstanding job.
We hope so. We hope so.
I hope so,
Definitely.
absolutely. Anyway, are you ready for me to begin talking about the divine curriculum?
Yes, very much so. And again, thank
Okay,
you for the aside on the gate. Such a beautiful
that's my
movie again.
pleasure. It's my pleasure. It was a great time in my life, and I'm happy that I had an opportunity to be a part of it. Anyhow, welcome everyone. The topic for today is what is the never-ending divine curriculum and how does it work? I'm thrilled to be here with the Baha'is of Clearwater, Florida, and let's begin. Okay, I'm waiting for my keyboard to work. There we go. Okay, so we've already talked about this. I'm Edward Price from Wilmette, Illinois. And for anyone who's interested, here's my contact information. This will be shown again at the end. And this is just simply a photo of me on the first day that my books were being sold at the Baha'i bookstore at the Baha'i Temple. I was a happy day for me. Anyway, if you want my contact information, there it is. Okay. So as mentioned, I'm the author of the Divine Curriculum series, and these are the three books that I have so far. More are in the pipeline. They came out 2015, 2019, and 2021 respectively. They're all available on Amazon. And here's the link if you want it to the gate on YouTube. But as I said, you can Google it and get to it very quickly. Okay, so why do I write about the divine curriculum? So a time came in my life when I began to think that our generation of Baha'is could do a better job teaching the faith. When I reflected on this question, I came across quite a few quotes from the writings. And here's one quote from Abdul Baha. I call it the speak out and say quote. By the way, I have many quotes here today, and I'm not going to read every quote word for word. That would become tedious. But the PowerPoint file that I'm using will be given to the Clearwater Baha'is, and I'm asking that a link be provided so that anybody who wants the PowerPoint can come along afterwards and download it. And then you can study the quotes more fully yourself. Anyway, back to the quote. Abdul Baha here says, each and every people and every religion await a promised one, and Baha'u'llah is that one who is awaited by all. And therefore the cause of Baha'u'llah will bring about the oneness of mankind. And this was a letter to a woman who was about to go pioneering, teaching the faith. And he was literally, I think, putting the words in her mouth telling her what to say when she goes out to teach the faith. You can see that he's advocating a very direct approach to stating the claims and the position of Baha'u'llah as the promised one. And he connects the fact that Baha'u'llah is the promised one to the fact that the cause of Baha'u'llah will bring about the oneness of mankind. That's really very important. So I was very intrigued by that. There were many quotes that are like this, and this gave me a focus on two things: the person of Baha'u'llah and his mission. So I started doing research on how to do all this and what the writings say on this topic, and then I came across a sudden realization. It was then that I came across this quote where Abdu'l-Baha says that the manifestations of God who founded the religious systems are united and agreed. There is no differentiation possible in their mission and teachings. So this actually was quite a shocker for me. The emphatic language that Abdu'l-Baha used, because he says there's no differentiation possible. So this gave me a different understanding than where I was starting from. I realized that even to discuss properly the revelation of Baha'u'llah, due to the God-given continuity of divine revelation, I would have to discuss all of the divine educators. But even though I had been engaging in a lifelong study of religion, I realized that my own expertise has its limits. So I self-limited my writing to the Abrahamic lineage, which includes the divine educators, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. That said, I do in fact honor all of the divine educators, even though I don't go into great detail in all of them. Anyway, one of the other features of the teachings that I now refer to as the divine curriculum, but is commonly called progressive revelation in the Baha'i community, is that as Baha'is, we are instructed not to show any favoritism or partiality among any of the divine messengers. Baha'u'llah was once asked which one is superior to the others, and he said, no, 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 no. He said, the essence of all of the prophets of God is one and the same. Their unity is absolute. To prefer one and honor to another, to exalt certain ones above the rest, is in no wise to be permitted. I think you'll agree with me that this is very emphatic language, that we are not to raise one messenger of God, one divine educator, over any of the others. Every true prophet, he says, hath regarded his message as fundamentally the same as the revelation of every other prophet gone before him. So no favoritism. So as I went into the writings and to the scriptures of the world, I really began to research the topic. And so what I've discovered is that this, what I call the divine curriculum approach, yes, indeed, it was initially inspired by the teachings of the Baha'i Faith, but it turns out that the principles of the divine curriculum can also be found throughout the sacred scriptures of the world in greater and lesser degrees. The seeds were planted long, long ago in the previous religious writings. So all of the prophets of God actually do speak with one prophetic voice. So let's get into the concept of the divine curriculum. So the place to begin with this topic is the first premise, the oneness and the infinity of God. This is very, very important, and it's pivotal to our understanding of the divine curriculum. So this approach agrees with the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, and the assertion is that there's but one God and an infinite God and one humanity. So here are some samples of selections from previous scriptures. From the King James Bible, Deuteronomy, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Or from the book of Isaiah, "I am the Lord and there is none else. There is no God beside me." And Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, "But to us there is but one God." From the book of Ephesians, "One God and Father of all, who is above all." And from the Quran, "Your God is one God. There is no God save him, the beneficent, the merciful." There are many passages. This is just a small selection of what is available in the other scriptures. So the oneness of God is affirmed by the previous scriptures. And Baha'u'llah and the Bab are equally emphatic. Here, a quote from Gleanings, he says, "He is a true believer in divine unity, who, far from confusing duality with oneness, refuseth to allow any notion of multiplicity to becloud his conception of the singleness of God." And he refers to the divine being who, by his very nature, transcends the limitations of numbers. And here's from a prayer where Baha'u'llah calls out and he says, "My inner and outer being testify that there is no God but him, and then all others have been created by his behest." So we see from all of the writings of the past and from the Baha'i writings as well, the oneness of God is emphatically affirmed. There's really no compromising from the Baha'i perspective on this principle. But not only is there just one God, we're also told that the reality of God is immeasurably exalted. God is unknowable in his essence. And I actually had too many passages that I wanted to share so many passages. Here's just one where Baha'u'llah is very, very direct and emphatic about the infinity of God. "All that the sages and mystics have said or written have never exceeded, nor can they ever hope to exceed, the limitations to which man's finite mind hath been strictly subjected. Immeasurably exalted is he above the strivings of the human mind to grasp his essence. No tie of direct intercourse can ever bind him to the things he hath created." So he's been veiled in the ancient eternity of his indivisible essence, and he's just utterly beyond our grasp. And more specifically, the writings tell us that he's actually beyond all conceptions of time and space as we know it. God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. And he says here, "The one true God alone and single is established upon his throne, a throne which is beyond the reaches of time and space." And Shoghi Effendi commented, "Time and space are physical things. God, the creator, is not in a place as we conceive of place in physical terms. We cannot picture him, his state." So this is an even more specific way of indicating the infinity of God. He is whatever God is. He is beyond any conception of time and space as we know it. So this is actually good news for humanity. God's infinity and oneness should steer humanity away from anthropomorphism. That word means essentially to attribute human characteristics to God. And if we put it in biblical terms, that would mean instead of us humans being, excuse me, instead of us humans being made in God's image, it would mean God being made in man's image. And so we set aside all the man-made constructs and concepts of God. And we also realize that fighting about man-made constructs, all of which falls short of the true reality of God, is completely pointless. So this can go a long way towards eliminating the religious strife that exists in the world. Okay, so we've established the oneness and the infinity of God based upon the scriptures, the sacred writings. So what are the reasons for creation? So this is an interesting question. If God is so infinite, why does he need to create anything at all? The answer is he doesn't. Baha'u'llah says, he verily can afford to dispense with all creatures. And yet, the creator chooses to create anyway. Why does he do that? He doesn't have to. Turns out that Baha'u'llah lays out for us a very simple reason. Here's an example of it from our Baha'i book known as the Hidden Words. He says, O son of man, veiled in my immemorial being and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee. Therefore, I created thee, have engraved in thee mine image and revealed to thee my beauty. And O son of man, I loved thy creation. Hence, I created thee. So clearly, there was in that infinite, incomprehensible mind of God, a thought, whatever a thought is in the mind of God, a thought of us. And he loved us. It's really just that simple. He loved us, and that is the reason that he created us. In my own mind, I imagine this to be like two loving parents. They're recently married and they decide that they want to have a child. Well, the child exists to them only in their thought at that moment, but they love that child, and so they go about the process of bringing that child into the world. Now, that's a human analogy. I'm sure it's completely inadequate, but maybe it gives us a slight clue as to what it might have been from God's perspective. I knew my love for thee, therefore I created thee, he says. So he creates us out of love. Okay. Given the loving decision to be the creator, to what end does God create? What's the purpose? What's the point of it all? And Baha'u'llah actually has answered that for us as well. He says, having created the world and all that liveth and moveth therein, he, through the direct operation of his unconstrained and sovereign will, chose to confer upon man the unique distinction and capacity to know him and to love him. A capacity that must needs be regarded as the generating impulse and the primary purpose underlying the whole of creation. So it seems that the objective and the purpose is that there should come into existence creatures that have the capacity to know God and to love him. It appears that he is looking to establish some sort of a two-sided, two-way relationship. And this is the purpose underlying all of creation. Okay, so if that's the goal, to enable the creation to know him and to love him, what does God create to fulfill this purpose? Well, of course, it's the whole universe that he creates. But to simplify the answer for the moment, he creates us, human beings, come into existence with fantastic cognitive and spiritual abilities. We are the creatures that have the capacity to know him and to love him. How blessed and wonderful and fortunate for us that we have that opportunity. So he says, upon the inmost reality of each and every created thing, he has shed the light of one of his names and made it the recipient of the glory of one of his attributes. So everything in creation reflects his attributes one way or another. But then he says, upon the reality of man, however, he hath focused the radiance of all of his names and attributes, and made it a mirror of his own self. Alone of all created things, man hath been singled out for so great a favor, so enduring a bounty. So we have the ability to reflect all of God's attributes, and this is unique in creation. Okay, so what are these divine attributes? Well, here are some of the attributes of God. It's certainly not a complete list. God is all-knowing and all-wise, all-loving, kind, all-bountiful, gracious, most generous, giving, all-merciful, forgiving, all-powerful, almighty, all-glorious. He is the just, the self-sufficient, the educator, the revealer, the eternal, the truthful, and on and on. There are many, many attributes of God. And we have the possibility at the human level of existence of manifesting all of these qualities. And we are created with this purpose in mind, so that we would be able to know God and to love him. Okay, grace meets need. So humans have the potential to reflect God's attributes. We also, as everyone knows, have the potential to be very bad. So really, like all things in creation, we need a divine educator to guide us, to conquer self and lead us towards our angelic nature, our virtuous side. So we could be more animalistic and selfish and egotistical if we want to, or we can be more like these attributes of God would have us be and lean more towards our angelic side. So we literally, in our human nature, have some sort of a fork in the road, some sort of a choice that we have to make between our not so very wonderful animalistic side and our angelic side. So to sum it up a little bit, God doesn't need us, but he loves us. We need him. We're created to know him and to love him, but he's unknowable. So if he's unknowable, what are we going to do? And this is where grace meets our need. So the Bab had this very interesting statement. Therefore, he says, it is necessary, according to true wisdom, that the pre-existent God describe himself to his creatures, that they may recognize the Creator, and that out of the grace of the pre-existent, contingent beings may attain their supreme end. So he needs to, or he wants to, describe himself to his creatures. And this is based upon the grace of God. Here's another passage. The door of the knowledge of the Ancient of Days being closed in the face of all beings. The source of infinite grace, according to his saying, his grace has transcended all things. My grace hath encompassed them all, hath caused those luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the realm of the spirit in the noble form of the human temple and be made manifest unto men. So he calls them sanctified mirrors, day springs of ancient glory, exponents on earth. They're the treasuries of divine knowledge, the repositories of celestial wisdom, he says. Continuing with the quote, through them is transmitted a grace that is infinite, and by them is revealed the light that can never fade. These tabernacles of holiness, these primal mirrors, which reflect the light of unfading glory, are but expressions of him who is the invisible of the invisibles. So it is through these great primal mirrors, these luminous gems of holiness, that the names and attributes of God, such as knowledge and power, sovereignty and dominion, mercy and wisdom, glory, bounty, and grace, are made manifest. So this is the reason that God sends his divine educators. Our need is met by his infinite grace. In fact, if we reflect on all of the things that God does, after creating us in the first place, it can easily be claimed that the sending of the divine educators is the primary act of grace of God towards humanity. As a note, we also describe these divine educators as manifestations of God and messengers of God, and there are many other terms used to apply to them as well. So we come to the central core idea of the divine curriculum. All of creation is a classroom. So what are the key elements of this divine curriculum? What's the structure? So obviously we're making an analogy here between the world of religion and the world of a school. So on the one hand, we envision God, we understand him to be like the owner and director of the school. All of creation is the school, the classroom. We human beings are the students in the schools. The divine educators sent by the owner of the school are the teachers. The textbooks are the sacred scriptures of the world, such as the Bible and the Quran and the Baha'i writings. And the teachings that are delivered in the sacred scriptures and through the lives of the divine educators is the curriculum. That's the content, the subject matter that is taught to humanity. So frankly, I think this is pretty close to a perfect analogy. All of these elements explain to us why actually all of creation is a classroom. Now it's very, very interesting that Abdu'l-Baha makes it very clear that if not for this education provided for the manifestations of God, he says all mankind would be found on the plane of the animal. They would remain darkened and ignorant, like those who have been denied schooling and who have never had a teacher or trainer. So if humans are left alone without an educator, we would be really just like all of the other animals. But when we receive the manifestations of God, they are our teacher and trainer, and they give us the schooling that we need. So Abdu'l-Baha and the sacred writings of the faith are actually even more explicit about this school analogy. Look at this quote. "O true companions, all humankind are as children in a school, and the dawning points of light, the sources of divine revelation, are the teachers, wondrous and without peer." And in a speech that Abdu'l-Baha gave during his time in America, he was discussing what is the mission of the prophet. And he says that the purpose of the mission of the prophet, the purpose of the divine law, is the education of the human race, the training of humanity. All mankind may be considered as pupil or children who are in need of a divine educator, a real teacher. And then here are some other wonderful quotes too. We'll go through quickly. Abdu'l-Baha says, "Read in the school of God the lessons of the Spirit and learn from love's teacher the innermost truths." He says, "The holy manifestations of God are the first teachers of the human race. They are the universal educators. The sending of prophets has ever been for the training of humanity. They are the first educators and trainers." Okay, so that's pretty clear. So who are the teachers? Now, actually, the Bab and Baha'u'llah say that the divine educators have been coming to humanity since time immemorial. Probably thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of divine educators have been sent to humanity over the course of millions of years of human evolution. However long humanity has been on the planet, it would be reasonable for us to think that God has been sending divine educators. Unfortunately for us, we are only informed historically of a small number of these names. And we will be receiving more divine educators in the future. So the ones that we know about in roughly chronological order: Krishna, Abraham, Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah are the ones that we have historical information about. Now, there are some others too, perhaps, that should be considered. Noah is a good example. And the Quran has mention of other names besides the ones that I've listed. Ultimately, the messengers of God, the divine educators, are innumerable. And in the future, there'll be more divine educators to come. So one of the things that all of them have in common, all of the divine educators were sent from the same God. So they are all representatives of the same God. But they appear in history they appear on the timeline of history in a sequential order. It's so in that sense, they're like grades of a school: fifth grade, sixth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. But the numbers don't matter. We don't care about the numbers. That's artificial anyway. But the fact that one grade leads into the next grade. And so they have imparted to humanity the profound impulse of God's religion into the body of mankind from time immemorial in the past and for time immemorial into the future. So any distortions or errors or alterations or divisions that have occurred, pretty much we can understand them as being man-made. So from the perspective of progressive revelation, from the perspective of the divine curriculum, we understand the divine educators as being mutually cooperative, mutually supportive members of one school faculty. And so this graphic kind of gives an illustration of that. They're not opponents, they're not antagonistic to each other. They're friendly and cooperative and collaborative towards one another. They are embracing and accepting of one another. And I think that's why the way they want us to be as well. So the divine curriculum approach views the divine educators, each of them in their lived historical circumstances. We view them on the timeline of human history. By the way, we are not the ones that put them on the timeline. Which one came first and which one came later, it has nothing to do with us. God is the one that puts them on the timeline, not us. So we're just acknowledging what he already did. And putting one earlier than the other is not raising one up or putting another one down. It's just the timeline of history as it actually played out. So when we look at the timeline, we realize that the divine educators appear in history approximately every 500 to 1,000 years. And as I've mentioned, there have been many, many of them. And here are some of the ones that are known to history. Put on a nice timeline graphic. You can see where the arrows intersect with the timeline. And you can see over here on the right-hand side of the screen, something very unusual has occurred. In the middle of the 19th century, 1844 and 1863, we received two divine educators. So far as we know, this is the only time in history when this has occurred. Baha'u'llah and the Bab referred to this as being very unique. Baha'u'llah even goes so far as to say this is a mystery that no mind can fathom. Only God truly understands this. But in sort of a general way, we can say that the magnitude of the revelation that was intended to be delivered in this era, the era that we are living in, was of such intensity and such power and such volume that God deemed it appropriate to send two divine educators to humanity in approximately the same period. Now, they were not both active at the same time. The Bab's dispensation preceded Baha'u'llah's dispensation, but they were contemporaries. They were well aware of each other, and historically, our information is that they never met face to face, but we do know that they were in correspondence with one another. Here's another way of looking at a more detailed mapping on a table where the names of the religions, the approximate dates, the names of the books, the part of the world where they came from, and the part of the world where their influence has been felt mostly. So here's a quote from the Bab. By the way, I added the bullets to make it a little easier to read. He says, in the time of the first manifestation, the primal will appeared in Adam. Then, as you can see here, he mentions the day of Noah, the day of Abraham, the day of Moses, the day of Jesus, the day of Muhammad, the day of the Bab, the day of Baha'u'llah. And he even alludes to the day of the one who will appear after Baha'u'llah. And he says, what shineth resplendent in each one of them hath been and will ever remain one and the same sun. So the primal will is also referred to as the first remembrance, the Holy Spirit, the Logos. It is like the rays of the sun emanating from the sun. God is the source, and the Holy Spirit, the primal will, radiates out through all of creation. And periodically manifests itself in the form of a human being. And that's what these great divine educators really are. Now, the writings of the faith, the Bab here says, there's no paradise more wondrous for any soul than to be exposed to God's manifestation in his day, to hear his voices and to believe in them. True knowledge, therefore, is the knowledge of God. And this is none other than the recognition of his manifestation in each dispensation. So whenever a manifestation of God appears in the world, each individual finds his paradise or her paradise through being exposed to God's manifestation and recognizing him each in his dispensation at his appropriate time. Now, Baha'u'llah also emphasizes that these manifestations of God have a dual station. There's a station of unity and there's a station of distinction. So regarding the station of unity, every one of them is a mirror of God, reflecting naught else but his self, his beauty, his might, and glory. And he says, no distinction do we make between any of his messengers. So it's very clear at one level, at one of their stations, is how connected and unified and united their pure, utter oneness among the messengers of God. No distinction do we make between any of his messengers. Here's a wonderful little cartoon I came across some years ago. Baha'u'llah compares the manifestations of God to be like the rising and the setting of the sun. And you can read this cartoon. Here you see that Lucy is looking at each day has a new sun, and she thinks it's a new sun, and she thinks it's different. And Charlie Brown says, what would you say if I told you there was only one sun? And Lucy says, I'd say you were crazy. And then Charlie Brown walks away. It's a cute cartoon. But doesn't it also express a lot of humanity's outlook with regard to these divine messengers? Okay, so the divine educators also have a station of distinction. They have a distinct individuality. They have a definitely prescribed mission. Each one of them is characterized by a special attribute, fulfilling a definite mission and being entrusted with a particular revelation. So when we understand the divine curriculum, we see that this approach recognizes both similarities and differences among the divine educators. We see both unity and distinction. And this is absolutely the way progressive revelation, or what I like to call the divine curriculum, is presented in the Book of Certitude. Now, Abdu'l-Baha also has an interesting point. In every dispensation, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon a central theme. So while we have many things in common, each time a messenger of God comes along, his definitely prescribed mission his individuality of time and place involves a focus on a certain theme. So here in short phrases are what the themes have been in the Abrahamic lineage. Abraham emphasized the oneness of God. Moses emphasized the law of God. Jesus emphasized the love of God. Muhammad emphasized submission to the will of God. The Bab emphasized in his teachings how all of creation is a reflection of God. And Baha'u'llah has emphasized the unity of the human race and the coming of universal peace. So if you look at this, what do you see? You see that over time, over the many centuries, from one dispensation to the next, you actually see a series of textbooks. You actually see empirically that an entire curriculum is being taught. Yes, there's overlaps as much that the religions have in common, but there's also a distinctive curriculum. And and it's cumulative in nature. For example, would it make any sense to try and teach the law of God without first having established the identity of God, the infinity and the oneness of God? So Abraham establishes the oneness of God, and later when Moses appears, he teaches the law of God. And isn't it interesting that before you could have an environment where love might flourish and thrive, you would want to have an orderly society governed by the rule of law. So love, the teaching of love, comes after the teaching of law. And even loving God, there's a higher level to which we can obtain, which is literally submitting our will to the beloved Lord himself. Also, it's very, very interesting, like Jesus's teaching about love, actually, it was a command that comes out of the book of Deuteronomy, which was in the Old Testament. It was stated in the law of Moses that you should love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your mind. But it was just part of Deuteronomy. It was just part of the Old Testament. Later, when Jesus appears, he singles that out and gives it special emphasis. So you can see one by one, stage by stage, each revelation is cumulative and it is building upon what the messengers of God had provided previously. You can see how really unified and collaborative and cooperative they really are. Okay, so we've talked about the textbooks. The textbooks in the classroom are the scriptures of the world. So just listing them briefly, the Bhagavad Gita, part of Hinduism, the Hebrew Bible for Abraham and Moses, the Zend Avesta for Zoroaster. There's actually quite a variety of Buddhist writings. That's why I list it that way. There's, of course, the New Testament, the Gospels of Jesus. There's the Quran, and there's the Bayan, which is the book of the Bab, and he wrote many, many more books than that. And then there's the Kitabi Akdas and many, many more books written by Baha'u'llah. And then, of course, in the future, there'll be more textbooks from the coming messengers of God. So whenever a divine educator comes into the world, he comes into the world with a textbook to record and transmit his curriculum to humanity, his teachings to humanity. All right, so let's get to the content. We've alluded to it a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit deeper. So if you look at the teachings, we've alluded to this already. Krishna mentioned fulfilling one's duty. And Abraham mentioned oneness of God and life is sacred and the law of God. And Zoroaster focused on the contrasting between good and evil and the importance of free will. Buddha mentioned and emphasized this release from suffering. And the other ones I've already mentioned, but each of them have had their place. So when you go into it in a little more detail, you have all these wonderful things that have been taught by the divine educators: conscience, individuality, intellect, responsibility, accountability, from the story of Adam and Eve. Noah had more guidance on good versus evil and the emphasis on choosing the good. Abraham, with the oneness of God and the sacredness of human life, he was fighting idolatry and he established the covenant with God. Moses did more of the same, establishing the law of God. Jesus' teachings focused on the kingdom of God. He emphasized the afterlife and the steps that everyone must take for salvation. He talked about being born again in the Holy Spirit, loving God. Muhammad emphasized many things, but his main theme was submission to the will of God. The Bab on the beauty of God being reflected in all things, and Baha'u'llah emphasizing the oneness of humanity and progressive revelation. So we've touched on these parts as well, with Buddha eliminating suffering, the eightfold path, and Zoroaster with the threefold path: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, overcoming evil and free will. And with Baha'u'llah, the oneness of humanity and establishing the most great peace and divine civilization. So, as I've mentioned, this is a cumulative process. And the mission of the prophets of God has been to train the souls of humanity and to free them from the thraldom of natural instincts and tendencies, Abdul Baha said, to edify and elevate the souls above self, to conquer evil, the insistent self, which is the real source of evil, to make human nature heavenly. Doesn't this look like a fairly comprehensive curriculum to you over the last 6,000 years? If you learn to do all these things, wouldn't your spiritual nature, your material nature, be under the control of your spiritual nature? Age to age, this is how the continuity of the divine curriculum has advanced humanity's spiritual education. Over time, literally, an entire curriculum has actually been taught to humanity. So we see that the pieces of the revelations are similar and they're also different. Each piece is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Each revelation has revealed part of the picture that God wants us to understand. Every piece sets the stage for the ones that follow. This is continuity. And every piece builds upon what was revealed previously, more on the idea of continuity. So the divine educators, every piece is essential to the entire picture, and the divine educators are gradually revealing the entire divine curriculum. Okay, so we want to emphasize that this approach of the divine curriculum is entirely even-handed in its treatment of every divine educator. If someone comes from a Jewish or Christian, a Muslim or a Buddhist background, doesn't matter. All the previous loyalties are maintained and expanded. The contributions of every one of the founders of the world religions is fully acknowledged. Their unique traits are appreciated in their historical context based upon trustworthy sources of information. There's no belittling being done of the divine educators. They're praised. And the divine curriculum approach shares knowledge. It passes it on from generation to generation. No messenger is regarded as superior to the other. No favoritism is in any way permitted, according to what Baha'u'llah said. The approach of the divine curriculum or progressive revelation is entirely even-handed. We cannot stress this enough, honestly. Now, there's another aspect of the divine curriculum approach, because if you look at if you look at the religions of the world, the most common rebuttal that people have is, of course, the religions are not the same. And of course, what we're saying is we're not claiming that the religions are the same. We're saying they are the same in part, and we're also saying that there are differences. But some of the differences were not intentional. Some of them are what we might call priest-prompted superstitions. That's a phrase that Shoghi Effendi used. And he contrasts that with the God-given truths given by the founders. So there's the contrasting and distinguishing between God-given truths and priest-prompted superstitions. Now, the divine curriculum approach, while it agrees and supports and embraces the different divine educators, is often at odds with the doctrines of the theologians and the clerics of the past, but it is faithful to the sacred writings. So this is actually a very important methodological assumption. In my own terminology, I like to refer to it as the divine side of religion versus the human side. And I consider this a crucial distinction to be made between the man-made aspects of religion and the divinely given aspects of religion. Because if we dwell on the human side, the man-made aspects, then what we end up with is endless confusion and contradiction. The only way to find the unity among the religions, not the sameness, the unity among the religions, is by looking at the divine side of the religions. And so here's a way to think of it. Think of the students in the classroom and think of the teachers in the classroom. If you look at the notes of the students, the notes are divergent, contradictory, and probably with gaps in them. The students' notes will be messy. But the teachers are not confused about their own teachings. Their notes, their curriculum will be clear, coherent, and correct. So what should we do? Should we rely on the scriptures, the teacher's notes, or should we rely on the student's notes? Well, if we rely on the student's notes, we end up with just confusion and contradiction. But if we rely on the divine side, on the teacher's textbook, then we will be much more likely to find the unity. We look at the divine educators with equal adoration. We cite them all. We let them speak, all with one voice. So now the Bab says something very interesting. The Lord of the universe hath never raised up a prophet, nor hath he sent down a book, unless he hath established his covenant with all men, calling for their acceptance of the next revelation and the next book. Because the outpourings of his bounty are ceaseless and without limit. So there's a contract here, there's a covenant, there's an agreement between man and God that each messenger makes with his followers. Basically, when my next manifestation appears, I want all of you to embrace his teachings because he is continuing my work. I want you to accept your promotion in the school of God. So this is what has actually happened, however. Throughout history, Each manifestation of God has been succeeded historically by the next manifestation of God. And what happened is that some people in each period in history accepted the new messenger of God. So, for example, the followers of Moses, they accepted they accepted Jesus. Well, they stopped being called Jewish people after that, and they became known as Christians. And some people that were Christians when Muhammad appeared in his time period, they accepted Muhammad, so they went on calling themselves Muslims. And some in the present era have accepted Baha'u'llah, and they're called Baha'is. So there's a progression of one revelation feeding itself into the revelation which is to come. But as we all know, there were large populations that rejected the next manifestations when they appeared and caused the manifestations to to experience a great deal of suffering. So instead of one unified religion moving forward through time as one coherent experience for humanity, we ended up with a splintering of the phenomenon of religion around the world. So those that rejected their new ones to come, they remained as they were. They remained as Jews, as Buddhists, as Christians, as Muslims, Zoroastrians, and whatever. They remained as they were, so they clung to the name that they had before. And as a result, in the world today, we don't see one unified religion. We see a landscape of many religions. Large populations of humanity were not staying current with the divine curriculum. And that is the explanation for the religious landscape that we have for humanity today. But just like you go through school, you graduate from fourth grade, you go on to fifth. At the end of the school year, your teacher says, "It's been wonderful spending this year with you, and I've enjoyed being your teacher, but now it's time for you to move on. So I'm promoting you to the next grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, eighth grade, ninth grade, whatever the number, doesn't matter what the number is. But from one grade to the next, along the way, humanity in the school of God is supposed to periodically accept promotion to the next grade. This is the way it should have been. And this is the way it should have been for the world of religion. Religion should have remained unified, coherent, one religion, because there's one God, and the earth is one school, evolving, a never-ending universal embrace. Now, of course, we understand, and God understood, that humanity has been in its childhood for roughly 6,000 years, maybe longer. And so it's not as if God was surprised by the way things turned out. But what I'm describing here is what would have been the ideal had we done everything perfectly in human history. Now, in the modern age, we have many, many problems. Disunity is the primary problem. It is the underlying feature of so many of humanity's difficulties, whether it's racism or fanaticism or extreme nationalism, wars and militarism, godlessness and tyranny, or more on the individual side, selfishness, corruption, egotism, materialism, greediness, excessive wealth. So these are all different forms of disunity that take place between individuals, communities, nations, within oneself, between man and God. These are all different forms of disunity. And Baha'u'llah says the first step essential for the peace and progress of mankind is its unification. This is actually a quote from the Universal House of Justice. He says, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So the illness of the age in which we are living in is disunity, and the remedy for it is actually unity. All of the ills of mankind are but symptoms and side effects of the basic disease of humanity, disunity. So this is not actually the ideal. This is not what God has intended for us. According to the world's religions, all people and all things are reflections of the same light of God, because as we've been discussing, there is only one God. So naturally, all of the light originates from the same source. All things are united as recipients of his light. The sun itself doesn't descend into the mirror. From God's exalted height, he shines his primal light, his Holy Spirit, his primal will upon all, and they reflect the light of his revelation. So humanity is one because we are all mirrors reflecting the same light from God. And here's a quote from the Bab, which explains this principle to us. Become as true brethren in the one and indivisible religion of God, free from distinction. For verily God desireth that your hearts should become mirrors unto your brethren in the faith, so that ye find yourselves reflected in them and they in you. This is the true path of God, the Almighty, and he is indeed watchful over your actions. Notice that the Bab says here, the one and indivisible religion of God. So this is one of many references that we have in the writings and the scriptures of the world's religions, where we see that from the divine perspective, from God's perspective, there's really just one universal, one indivisible religion of God. Fascinating. Now, as to the human nature, we have both a spiritual nature and a material nature. And the purpose of our educators coming to teach us is to subdue the material nature, which incline us towards evil. And according to the Baha'i teachings, there's no independent force of evil in creation. There's no being out there that makes us do the bad things. Terms such as devil or Satan are in fact used in the sacred writings, but they're symbols of the promptings of the lower nature of man. This is both good news and bad news. This is good news because there's nobody out there that's making you and I do the bad things that we do. And it's bad news because that means there's nobody else out there making us do the bad things. We ourselves are responsible for our actions. And so our mission as individuals, one part of our mission is to get our material nature under the control of the spiritual nature, to subdue the material nature, which inclines us towards evil. And what I'm talking about actually is the battle for evil. Let me excuse me. The battle to conquer evil is actually a battle to conquer our own selfish nature. Think of that. So we were saying earlier that the purpose of the divine curriculum is to enable us to know God and to love God. And implicit in these first two, we should add to choose God, because God wants us to have knowledge voluntarily of God. He wants us to love God through our own free will. So knowing God and loving God necessarily implies making a conscious choice towards God. So the mission of the prophets has been to train the souls of humanity and to free them from the thraldoms of natural instincts and physical tendencies. The divine curriculum of all the revelations gone before us has been to teach us to know, love, and choose God, to elevate the soul above our selfish nature, to conquer the insistent self, which is our real source of evil, to make human nature heavenly, to prepare souls for the afterlife, and of course, to establish God's divine civilization on earth. This is what the curriculum has been all about. So we've talked about this. The goal of the curriculum is to conquer the evil in man. To our one crusade, Abdul Baha says, the one crusade of the cause of God is against the insistent self, the evil properties of the human heart, spirit. And then this translates into civilization. Material civilization is like unto the body. No matter how infinitely graceful, elegant, and beautiful it may be, material civilization is dead. Divine civilization is like the spirit, and the body gets its life from the spirit. The world of nature is an animal world. Until man is born again from the world of nature, that is to say, he becomes or she becomes detached from the world of nature, he is essentially an animal. And it is the teachings of God which convert this animal into a human soul. Okay, so let's focus briefly on the role of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, the most recent messengers of God in the divine curriculum. So we've had 6,000 years of human history so far, and there have been many divine messengers come into the world. This graphic is not meant to cover every name, it's just illustrative of the process. In the what's known as the Adamic or prophetic cycle, for 6,000 years, beginning with Adam and concluding with Muhammad, we have all of previous recorded history. The Bab is the pivot, the primal point in terms of his designation in the writings, and he stands as the termination point. His ministry, his dispensation, is the termination point of the Adamic prophetic cycle. So the prophetic cycle ended 180 some years ago in the year 1844. Now, the dispensations of the Bab and Baha'u'llah are really interesting. Baha'u'llah, his dispensation is expected to last for a minimum of 1,000 years. So we've got somewhere around 820 years to go in this history. The Baha'i, the history of our dispensation, if you put it on a timeline of a 12-inch ruler, if you put it on a ruler of 12 inches, the 12 inches is the 1,000 years, and the 180 years we've completed so far is roughly 18% of that first 1,000 years. 82%, or roughly 820 years or more, is remaining. And that's where we are in history. We have a long way to go in the dispensations of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. So the goal of the divine curriculum in the present era is to achieve the oneness of humanity, to establish the most great peace and divine civilization, and to accomplish the full conversion of the animal man into the angelic human soul. We're talking about nothing less than the conquest of evil, actually. So the universal peace, what Baha'u'llah calls the most great peace, is going to be established in these 1,000 years. And the writings of the faith refer to this as humanity's coming of age. Childhood is over, and the transition to adulthood is underway. This period of time is humanity's adolescence. And according to the teachings, we are told it will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the cycle of fulfillment, what's ahead of us, is truly astounding. That whole 6,000 year period is that little arc on the left, because the scale here is much larger. We are told that the cycle of fulfillment that has just begun is going to last 500,000 years. Baha'u'llah is simply the first divine educator to appear. So he's the inaugurator of this new fulfillment cycle. Really, the Bab and Baha'u'llah are the inaugurators of it together. And there will be many, many messengers of God to come. So actually, if you look at this, if the most great peace is to be established during the 1,000 years approximately of Baha'u'llah's dispensation, that means that universal peace is going to be established very early in the fulfillment cycle. We can't begin to imagine in our present stage of humanity what great glorious outcomes and destiny God has in store for humanity after the achievement of the most great peace. From our perspective in time, achieving universal peace seems like the end point of history. And this is understandable from our perspective so early in the dispensation in the 21st century. But in fact, if we understand what the teachings are telling us, the establishment of the most great peace is really just the beginning of unimaginably great things which are in store for humanity. We can't begin to guess what that's like, what that's going to be like. So if we put the timeline of the 500,000 years on the same 12-inch ruler, the scale of everything looks quite different. That little colored area all the way to the left is the entire 6,000 year period. And we are at the dotted line on the left side of the graphic. Not even an eighth of an inch. It looks like it's like 0.15 inches. Not even an eighth of an inch. It's really quite amazing. So much of human history, so much wonderful, unimaginably fantastic human history is in store for us. So Shukya actually talks about what follows the emergence of the most great peace. So this quote is worth looking at for just a moment. This is from his book, The Promised Day Has Come. Then will the planet, galvanized through the universal belief of its dwellers in one God and their allegiance to one common revelation mirror within the limitations imposed upon it the effulgent glories of the sovereignty of Baha'u'llah, shining in the plenitude of its splendor in the Abha paradise, and be made the footstool of his throne on high, and acclaimed as the earthly heaven, capable of fulfilling that ineffable destiny fixed for it from time immemorial by the love and wisdom of its creator. It just makes your head spin. It makes your heart go pity-pat in my mind to try to contemplate the wonders of what is in store for humanity by the will of God. So here we are at the conclusion of our discussion, some reflections. We have 6,000 years of human history that have been getting us ready for this stage in human history. The dispensation of Muhammad was the last one entirely in the Adamic cycle. When it ended, the cycle ended too. The dispensation of the Bab terminated the Islamic dispensation. And this is true whenever a new manifestation of God appears, he terminates the dispensation of the divine educator which preceded him. And it is also terminating the Adamic cycle, as I've shown you. It was, in my view, the end of the beginning of human history. And it saw the first moments of the age of fulfillment. The dispensation of Baha'u'llah marks the 1,000-year beginning of the age of fulfillment, during which universal peace and divine civilization will finally and fully emerge. And then mankind will at last be ready to attain the unimaginable destiny God, our loving God, has in store for us. So thank you very, very much. I welcome questions and answers if anybody wishes to offer them. And my contact information is here for you again. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to leave my screen up for just a little moment longer so that if anybody wants to jot down my contact info, you can do that. I'm happy to talk with anyone who has questions or maybe wishes to argue with me a little bit. That's fine. Okay.
Well,
And
Edward, there's 2 points actually I'd like to ask you about. There's the
absolutely,
purpose of life that you mentioned.
yes,
So from gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah, it says the purpose of God in creating man hath been and ever and will ever be to enable him to know his creator and to attain his presence.
yes,
And further, he explains 2 sentences later, whoso hath recognized the dayspring of divine guidance and entered his holy court, hath drawn nigh unto God and attained his presence, a presence which is the real paradise, and of which the loftiest mansions of heaven are but a symbol.
yes,
And then, of course, there's more explanation as to what he meant by the purpose of God in creating man hath been and will ever be to enable him to know his creator and to attain his presence. So the reason why I'm mentioning this to you is that this idea of attaining God's presence has been in history a topic of great tumult. And I say this in the context that the beginning of the Baha'i Faith, the gate, the movie, all of that, the belief of many people who thought that Baha'is should die or that the Babis should die before them was that there's no one after Muhammad, that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, and that there's no revelation after that of Muhammad. Now, it's a little different, of course. Christians and Jews, they believe in someone to come But with Mohammedans, as they were called, or Muslims now, a lot of people who find the Baha'i faith, they'll say that God will come in the end. You know, Jesus Christ comes too, but God is coming. Whereas Baha'u'llah explains here that attaining God's presence is in the personage of the manifestation of God. How do
Exactly.
we how do we explain that from one perspective to a Muslim, but then also to one who comes from atheist background, explaining that again, it's not just a wise man that has a wise idea or a good idea. It's the personification of God on earth in one sense.
Absolutely.
How do we bridge this gap of very different understandings?
Well, we can only offer what's in the sacred writings. Um, there has been a great deal of theological confusion over the centuries. For example, Jesus said, "Whoso has seen me has seen the Father. The Father and I are one. I am in the Father is in me." Well, yes, he said that. Those are true statements. Many people have taken verses like that to interpret an incarnation concept, that is, God in the flesh. But there are many passages, of course, for an hour or so presentation. I can't share with the audience all of the quotes and explanations that we have, but you've actually already made the main point that Baha'u'llah has said that to attain the presence of God is to attain the knowledge and the recognition of the manifestation of God. Or if you happen to have been living in the lifetimes of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, maybe you could actually get in the room with them and be there face to face. But for most of human history, I've just shown you the incredible timeline. For most of human history, getting in the room and saying hello, how are you today, is not an attainable thing. So we have to attain the presence of the manifestation of God by through prayer and through studying the words that they revealed. And of course, our only physical way is when we go on pilgrimage at the sacred shrines. We, in a different sort of a sense, attain the presence of the manifestation. But in the Book of Certitude, Baha'u'llah clearly addresses this question of finality. Every religion, in one form or another, has sought to make itself exclusive or superior to the others. And, we don't fight with people. If that's how they believe, that's how they believe. But from the perspective of progressive revelation, in Gleanings, Baha'u'llah makes it explicitly clear. I shared that quote with you. To place one in superiority to the other, he says, is in no wise permitted. No distinction do we make between any of God's messengers. But even more important than that, attaining the exact presence of God is utterly impossible by the writings of the world religions themselves. Like the Quran, Baha'u'llah quotes in the Book of Certitude. There's a verse that says, no vision taketh in him, he taketh in all vision. So clearly it's human beings cannot in any ordinary sense attain to the presence of the invisible of the invisibles, the hidden essence of the reality of God. That is beyond human capacity. And the writings say that door of access is forever closed. Not even the manifestations of God themselves have access to the inner essence of God. I'm not even sure what that would be. It's beyond our comprehension. Any mention of the essence of God is restricted by the limitations of the human brain, the human mind.
I mean,
So,
you just got me at the word essence, whatever in my head, at the word essence. So
yeah, well, okay, but it's a crucial distinction between essence and attributes. God, in his essence, in his own inner reality, is unknowable and not accessible.
so are you saying that, not to say manifestation of God now in the context of the prophets as we know them, but manifestation of God through attributes of God in this reality, it's as they're expressed, not actually what they are. Is that correct?
Well, who knows what the loving nature of God is? Who knows what the omniscience of God, that universal infinite consciousness might be like? We can't begin to guess what that's like. However, when a manifestation of God comes into the world, he gives us evidences, he gives us signs, clues, hints, glimpses of what that might be like. So, for example, Baha'u'llah never went to a school, same with Bob, but they both showed innate knowledge. They didn't need a teacher. The Bob's teacher, as was mentioned in the history of the faith, brought him back to his uncle because I can't teach this one anything. He doesn't need a teacher. That's just one tiny little example. How there's so many examples throughout our history where the individual human being that was the manifestation of God demonstrates qualities of God. But inherently, that demonstration of divine qualities is limited by the physical characteristics of earthly existence. So we human beings don't ever have access to what the full exposure would be to the attributes of God. It's like what what explosion of light or heat could we endure? Could could we get close to the heat of the sun and survive? The intensity of God, the magnitude of his glory and his greatness is simply utterly off the scale, and we can't remotely approach the essence or the being or the reality of God. We are in this earthly existence as students in a school, and the teachers are sent to us, and they teach us what we have the capacity to learn. So, Lord knows what we're going to get in the future. But in the present and in the previous dispensations, we've been getting an incremental, bit by bit revelation from God. Certainly, what we have received, even from the Bab and Baha'u'llah, is not everything that God has in store for humanity. And so, over the centuries to come, the millennia to come, vastly more things that we can't even, hypothesize about or imagine will be disclosed to humanity. And that is because the grace of God is never ending. Is that making sense?
It does, and I think I can help make it work with this quote from Baha'u'llah. He says that evidence of God is everywhere, that
Yes.
every created thing is a sign of the revelation of God, and
Yes.
that nothing whatsoever in the whole universe can be discovered that does not reflect his splendor. So though
Yes.
we may not
All true.
ever understand the essence of God, whatever that may mean, again, over my head right there, whatever that may
Yes.
mean, we can at least see the signs of God in everything that is. And
Yes.
if
This
I
is in
understood you
the realm of
correctly,
creation, and this is in the realm of attributes. It's not the inner workings of the mind of God.
but it seems to me that this next 1,000 years, at least, we're going to be spending time trying to understand what those signs are.
Absolutely.
Just the reality around us, seeing these
Yes.
reflections that we never really pondered as well as we could now that we know we should. If
Well,
that makes
just think
sense.
of how science has exploded in the last 180 years. That's just an example. When the outpouring of the Holy Spirit comes into the world, human intelligence and human insight expands. And so it will continue for the dispensation.
So before we get to Terry's question, and I'm sorry for hogging it here, Terry, but I need to put a pin in it with this. So it seems, as you mentioned, science, explosion of knowledge, scientific understanding, growing, and just in reality, all science is doing is helping us understand reality and make use of it. This idea of scientific understanding that has grown so much, yes, inspired by the Holy Spirit, it's a theory that I'm positing here that in fact understanding of science, understanding of reality, that is, it's just this understanding of God's creation and more again getting in tune attuned with attuned attuned with the word of God as it's reflecting in creation. So what I mean to say here,
Yes.
it seems to me that you're in explaining this, not dividing science and religion, but
Not at
practically
all.
explaining science and religion to be this understanding of reality that God created.
Absolutely. The writings of the faith clearly give us an understanding that here's one way to think of it, that there are two books of God. There's the book of Revelation, which is what my talk today was mostly about, but there's also the book of creation. And actually, the early scientists like Newton and Kepler and others, they all imagined in their scientific work that they were reading the book of God in the universe, the created universe. They were understanding God's handiwork and thereby learning about what God had created. So there's really two books. There's the book of God from the book of creation, and then there's the book of God from divine revelation. And they go hand in hand. And we're supposed to use all of our powers, assisted by the forces of the Holy Spirit, to learn about both and work them together so that material civilization and spiritual civilization will go hand in hand. What we're really working on in the divine curriculum is giving birth to a heavenly civilization, also known as the kingdom of God on earth. These things are
I
meant to
see
go
you
together.
invoked the Lord's Prayer there, huh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You bet.
So, Terry, in a moment, I'm just gonna cap this off for everybody. So, we talked about creation, and we
Yes.
talked about something that's really a never-ending story. This
Never
eternal
ending.
faith of God,
That's right.
changeless in the past, changeless in the future, has always been and always will be. That's a mind blow moment there, because we're not talking about something for the past 8,000 years, 50, 100,000, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. We're talking about eternity in the
There's
past and that
no
way too.
finality. That's right. And there's no finality. This is an ongoing process for centuries and millennia to come. Absolutely. Never
Terry,
ending. I like
Okay.
that phrase myself. Never
never
ending.
ending, yes.
Okay.
Except for the presentation today. It has an end, everybody.
Yes, it does have it.
All right.
That's true.
So, Terry, please ask your question.
Okay. Actually, I got two of them. The first
Hi,
question
Terry.
is, hey, good morning. Aloha. How
Good
you
morning.
doing? Yeah, my first question is, what role does technology have in the revelation? And the second question would be, okay, you're talking to an atheist. Okay, as human beings, we live in a three-dimensional world, you know, and some people have described the manifestation probably living in a fourth or a fifth dimension. Would that be accurate if you're going to describe that to an atheist? So go ahead and answer those.
I'll take the second part first. The 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 truth is no one knows. if we're blunt and completely forthright about it, none of us has any idea what realm or dimension the manifestations of God exist as. We have a clue, however, a very, very tiny little clue that is available to us with our ring symbol in the Baha'i Faith, because there's the 3 horizontal lines. And of course, this is very symbolic, and it's just a hint of a glimpse of an idea. But we have the realm of God, the first horizontal line on the ring symbol, and we have the middle horizontal line, which is the realm of the manifestations of God. And then we have the bottom horizontal line, which is the realm of creation. That includes all of creation, the spiritual worlds, as well as the physical worlds. And then, of course, the vertical line, just to complete the conversation of the ring symbol, symbol is the vertical line represents the light and the power of the Holy Spirit binding everything together. But the reason I mentioned the ring symbol is that the realm of the manifestations is not the same as the realm of God, and it's also not the same as the realm of creation. Or put in other words, it appears that we're being told that they exist in some unique realm of their own. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it's like. And we'll probably never have, even after we pass on into the next world, it's above our realm of existence. We can be told about it, but we can, at some point, I imagine, but we probably will never be able to experience it directly. It's like my little dog that walks around the house here. He's a sweet, lovely little creature, and we live side by side. We sleep in the same sleeping area, but he has no idea about this conversation that we're having today about the divine curriculum. His realm of existence can never encompass the thoughts, the feelings, the attitudes, the experiences of what it's like to be a human being. We can hug each other close, hold each other close, and still his realm of existence, his nature of existence is inexorably at a different level than what I'm allowed to give into experience. So even if someday in the future I come or you come personally face to face with Baha'u'llah, his reality is not going to be the same as your reality. His reality is something far beyond what we can comprehend. And I think this is probably what the people who met him face to face during his earthly ministry would have said as well, that he was existing on an altogether different realm, even when he was in the same room with everyone else. So we'll never know. We'll never know what it is. So if it makes an atheist or a secular humanist or a scientist happy to use terminology like a different dimension, that's fine. It's just a word. It doesn't really mean that you know what you're talking about, because none of us actually knows what we're talking about when it comes to dimensions. Science hasn't figured hardly any of that out yet. You probably got centuries to go before any of that is truly understood. So if they want to use that term, I think it's fine, but I wouldn't claim it's accurate or I wouldn't claim it's inaccurate. It's as good a language as anybody else's language, and let them use it if they want to. That's kind of where I'm coming from that.
Okay.
So is that okay?
Well, it sounds similar to what I've heard Peter Kahn mention in some of his tapes talking about the magnetic attractive principle and stuff. So that's good enough. Thanks.
Yeah, very good. And
And
so
then the first question about technology and
the
the
role
role
of
of
technology in the revelation. Well, my approach to this might surprise you at first. The first technology that we could refer to in the Revelation is that Baha'u'llah used a bottle of ink and a quill and parchment to reveal his word. And a pen and ink and paper, that's technology. It's not electronic, but it's technology. Like the wheel was technology at a certain time and still is, actually. Anyway, so the pen actually is the technology most associated with the revelation itself. Now, beyond that, there's other uses of technology that are very, very important, but they have more to do with the promotion and promulgation, distribution, the diffusion of the revelation. So you and I are talking on Zoom today. I'm sitting here in front of my laptop. I presume you're doing much the same thing on your end. We're talking through the intermediation of the technology so that you can hear my voice and I can hear your voice, and we can look at each other and communicate. I don't know where you live. Oh, it says you live in Alabama. I live in Illinois. This communication would not be possible without technology. But here we are, two souls talking about the revelation. So we're making use of the technology in a very functional way to carry on the work of the cause. When we send emails to one another, when we put television programs on TV, we're using technology all the time. When we get in our car to go to do a home visit to somebody's home, one of the core activities of the faith, or when we drive away to go and do a children's class, we do some at the temple or in somebody's home. We're using technologies all the time to promote the revelation. So technology is very important. It is a means to an end, enabling us to get the work done, the work of the cause accomplished. Is that good?
Great. Yeah, I'll use that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's good stuff. And we love it. It's great. I mean, this conversation, without technology, it couldn't occur. And so here we are, we're having a wonderful discussion, getting to know each other and sharing important thoughts, and we're using technology to do it. It's great. So
We thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a great session. You've been so thorough on the subject of progressive revelation, this divine curriculum, and it's extremely valuable that a lot of us here, again, most of us have come into contact with progressive revelation as probably like the first concept we learned before we learned about Baha'u'llah. And it's extremely
absolutely.
valuable that we get this down when we talk with people in general, because the Baha'i Faith isn't bringing this idea that we're in any way better, as you have explained from Baha'u'llah and from Abdul-Baha, explaining very clearly that all the manifestations of God are one indivisible essence. It's all from one God. And this message, which is just continuing through eternity, is this message that we have today. It's not a different message. It's the same message, and we are all from the same Father, the same God.
It's the same and it's different.
Yes.
Same
Yes.
and different. Unity
Yes.
and distinction. That's very important.
Yes, yes. And this distinction is by virtue of our growth, not by virtue of our lack of capacity
That's right.
only, but our growth
revelation,
because we gain it.
that's right. Each revelation has its unity and its distinctive characteristics suited to the age in which it was revealed. And what I've tried to stress today is that it's cumulative in nature and it's ongoing and never ending. Yay.
Well, we want to thank you so much
pleasure.
for joining us today. On behalf of the Clearwater Baha'is, I thank you. And more importantly, we look forward to discussing some more of this divine curriculum. If you can visit us again sometime, perhaps a part
I
2.
would love to.
We
The
appreciate
truth,
it.
there's so much more material than we could cover. By the way, let's remind everybody that there will be a recording of this, and you're going to post it on the YouTube channel.
Yes, yes. So
my
there are
PowerPoint
people watching
slide.
now. No, there are
Yeah,
people watching right now. So those of
I
you
know.
on YouTube and Facebook, please look at the video description that we'll be updating shortly. We have the PowerPoint that was used for the presentation today. A link to it will be made available shortly that will let you to look at all the content that you just saw. And again, we thank you again for giving us that so we can post it online.
Wonderful. My pleasure.
So without much further ado, we want to thank all of you who have joined us on Zoom. Your questions, of course, comments that were made throughout the presentation in the chat, so welcome. We want you to know that as we are inviting, again, speakers weekly, including the one you just heard today, we are very happy to have you to please share with your friends, your family, and most importantly, we look forward to having our speaker here again next time very soon, very, very soon. So again, for all of us that have friends who are celebrating Christmas, it's an excellent time to talk about progressive revelation, the coming of Jesus Christ, his birth, as well as his rebirth, his return. Alapa, everyone. Greetings.
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful.